where the defense offers no evidence, it would be my hope that we could have a charge conference this afternoon. If it gets to close to 5 o'clock, then we'll change that plan. And I don't think any of you or I particularly want to stay late in the day after 5 to do that. We can just do that in the morning. If we do the charge conference in the morning, I think that probably we would have to just move the closings to Monday. I think it would be ambitious to say we get a charge conference and closings done before 1.
Our preference to be able to prepare overnight, knowing exactly what the charge would be. So
yes,
in the charge conference, we will, and I don't think it'll take long. I do know, obviously, we'll have at least some motions to be heard immediately after the state's evidence,
yes,
and also would need a brief amount of time to meet with Mr. Smith right afterwards.
Well, we'll just play it by ear. I don't have a strong preference. If we have time tomorrow to do closings, then that would be an efficient use of time. If we don't, then we'll do it Monday. There's no rush. State, have any thoughts on scheduling?
I would say at this point, I'd probably say we're getting closer to the Monday closing arguments. I think she's got at least another hour, and it'll probably be an hour or so with the medical examiner. So just trying to be realistic. We're probably about where I thought we would be, maybe a half a day behind, but I think we probably would be pushing it to do closings in the morning at this point.
Right. I do want to, even if we conclude the state's evidence, say at 4:30, I would like to make some progress on motions, and I do have a set of proposed instructions. I'd like to at least go over them preliminarily and hear from the parties any particular issues that we need to talk about in more detail. That would be very helpful to at least get that far today if we can. But again, this all depends on the defense's decision with respect to testimony and evidence, that sort of thing. So we've got some variables at play. All right, let's bring jurors in. Is the defense all right with the screen here?
I mean, I've spent a fair amount of the trial in that corner, Your Honor. I've just returned.
All right, that's fine.
And I would say for the shoe print evidence, yes. For feature evidence, particularly with the medical examiner, I would have more of a problem with it being there.
All right.
But I don't believe that's their intent. So
that's fine. I mean, let's leave it here. I want to make sure. I think it's important to be able to see jurors throughout a proceeding, and so I'm not always comfortable with the screen blocking the view of the jury box. But in this instance, I think it's fine. Make an exception. All right. That's fine. It's fine with you. All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. For the remainder of this presentation, we're going to put the screen here. It makes more sense to have it behind the witness in most situations, and we'll move it back there after this witness, but we're going to leave it here in the center of the room so that perhaps everybody can see it a little bit more closely than otherwise. All right. I believe we're resuming with questions from Mr. Waller.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Agent Davis.
Hello.
We'll excuse me, turn our screen back on. I believe where we broke, when we broke for lunch, this was the last slide that we were looking at, and this is the portion of your processing in which you're doing the analysis. Is that correct, ma'am?
We are now going into the comparison,
Okay.
but yes.
All right, and I believe when you said you began your comparison, you immediately were able to say that item number 80 could be excluded, but you needed to do further processing on item 76.
Yes, sir.
And, Your Honor, permission for Agent Davis to stand down at this
Yes,
point.
if you'll just be sure to keep your voice up so we can all hear you.
We can go to the next slide at this point. What do you see here?
So I've actually taken item number 76, the right and left shoes, the red sneakers, if you recall, Nike, and I've taken a close-up photo. On the upper picture is just a close-up photo of the area that seemed to fit closer to what was on the vent. We have rectangles within rectangles, and then we have a voided area, and then more rectangles within rectangles. And then I've just zoomed in. If you look at the yellow circle, I've zoomed in on the yellow circle, and that is the area that I've zoomed in. So just so you can kind of get a closer look of what you're actually seeing on the shoe.
And why the right shoe?
When I made standards of this particular shoe, and then I made a transparency, and I lined it up onto the vent, the right shoe had the right components. If you look in the screen, the void starts between the two rectangles, and it's exact opposite on the left shoe. So when I put the overlay on top of it, it didn't line up. So the right shoe had more of the elements line up.
And the dryer vent that we saw earlier that I believe is in that box right beneath you, is that the item you used to do the overlay at this point, or a photo from that vent?
I used both.
And the area in which you chose to examine here again, why that particular area of the shoe?
Basically, my thinking is if you look at the shoe overall itself, that voided area really only happens kind of 4 different times in that shoe. And the elements get bigger towards when you go from the toe area towards the ball area of the shoe. So it had to be in one of these areas that lined up a little bit better. And when I did the overlay, like I said, and I laid it onto the vent, this particular area right here seemed to line up the best.
To the next slide.
Now this is a close-up of what you just saw, but I have horizontally flipped it. Meaning, remember when I said that I make a standard, I put the powder onto the shoe, and I take that tape and then I flip it and put it there. You're seeing a reverse image. So to make it easier, instead of you having to flip in your mind, I just went ahead and horizontally flipped it on the screen.
So can you go back to the previous slide and kind of show us the difference here? We're talking about the same shoe, correct?
Yes, sir.
And
then you look at this recessed area right here, or that void, and it points more towards the right-hand side. The next screen, I've just mirror imaged it, so now it points towards the left-hand side of the screen.
and that would be consistent with how the impression would be on the dryer vent.
Yes, that would be how you would step onto a surface. And then I made the standard of it, so I horizontally flipped the standard. So what you're looking at is where I had put powder onto the shoe, lifted the tape, put it on to the white card, and then I horizontally mirror flipped it.
The standard that you're speaking of, Agent Davis, is that one of the standards there behind you?
Yes, it is.
If you can,
It would be States Exhibit 364.
and you have that exhibit in your hand now, Agent Davis, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And Your Honor, permission to allow her to use that exhibit while she's speaking with the jury?
Yes.
So this particular area that you're seeing right in here is this area that is located right in this general kind of upper ball area of the foot or the shoe. Now remember, what you're seeing here is going to be flipped from what you see there.
And were there certain class characteristics that you noticed when you did this processing of the shoe in this way?
So when we're talking about class characteristics, remember it's the design. So we talked about the design of the shoe being, there's several rectangles within rectangles, void or recessed area, and then other rectangles within rectangles. We're talking about shape and size. So like I said before, kind of a rectangular shape, the spacing between the elements. Some of these are corresponding. And then let's go into wear. I do see some wear within the shoe. And remember, the shoe has raised areas. So when you're stepping on it, that's what comes in contact with the surface. When you're wearing it down or eroding it, that raised area kind of goes back down towards the recessed area. So then some of the recessed area that would not normally come in contact now comes in contact with the surface. And you can see that right within this area that's right next to the void. Some of this area has actually worn down a little bit to the point that now that comes in contact with the surface. This is not extreme wear because it's in a very generalized area. Everyone's going to wear kind of their shoe down in just that area, but it is some wear.
And what'd you do next?
So I did my comparison. I'm now to my evaluation portion. I've taken the photo, which has been enhanced and then tonally reversed, meaning the white's gone to the black and the black's gone to the white.
And again, this photograph that we're seeing here on the screen is the photo of the vent while it was on this side of the apartment building. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. It's just been enhanced as you've already described.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And then on the right-hand side, I have my right shoe, which I horizontally flipped just to kind of help visualize. And then within the yellow circles is the areas that I'm talking about. And my conclusion was that it was a limited association of class characteristics to the right shoe, item number 76. And I'm basing this on your design. The design features do match. I do have rectangular elements within other rectangular elements. I have a void or space, a recessed area. Below that, I have another rectangle within a rectangle in here. And then when I go to physical shape and size, if you don't mind, go to one of the photos.
And which exhibit is that?
This is States Exhibit 368. I also use States Exhibit 367, but I just have the overlay on 368 right now. When I place it over, several of the elements do end up lining up, spacing between those elements. Remember, physical shape and size, the distance between each one, how fat the elements are, or the shape, physical size of each element.
And when you say those items line up, what do you mean?
If I were to place this, so the overlay on top, they do match on some of the areas. Now, keep in mind, this is a surface that is bent. It's very pliable. So before when I talked about that rubber stamp placing on a flat surface, now I have a surface that is very pliable, it's very bumpy. So now, when you set that stamp onto a pliable surface, some of that surface is going to get up into those recessed areas, and it's going to leave portions of the print that normally wouldn't leave. So I have to take that into account when I'm looking at this. I see areas that look like they've smeared off. I see portions of the impression itself that look a little bit farther away in distance, but then I also see overlapping and some smearing within the print. So I kind of have to keep that in mind. Am I actually seeing an impression that's made, or am I seeing areas that have touched up in the recessed areas? They're overlapping. And then I come to wear. So if you take kind of a close look in this general area within the circle, I do see some indications of wear. However, remember I'm talking that surface might have gone up and touched an area that normally wouldn't. So I'm going to kind of explain what I'm looking at. On the bottom right-hand side, you have your right shoe, item number 76, this area right in here that has started to wear down. The bottom left-hand photo is the standard that I flipped, and so this should be exactly the same. It's from the same thing. You go up into the photo, and I do see some indications of this general wear pattern. However, I want to be very transparent with you guys that there is an area right here that there's a void. I don't know why there's a void there. It would be right in here, but take into account that you're climbing onto a wall, and that there might be something on the shoe that fell off of the shoe. I got these shoes a week after the incident from the date that was on the bag itself. So maybe something came off the shoe. In a week, maybe he did something with his shoes that could have caused. I'm sorry. The person that was wearing the shoes may have done more activities that eroded away some of the outsole.
For the record, objection sustained, but continue, please.
And then, like I said, there's different planes that run within this pliable surface. I have to take that into account. And so on that sliding scale, I've gone from neutral up to limited. I can't say that it's really for sure where that I'm looking at on some of the aspects, and I can't say exactly why some of the elements have shifted over in it, but I know that there is limitations being pliable surface. So that's kind of shifted me right to limited association of those class characteristics.
So the surface area in which this impression was taken from, was that a contributing factor to your opinion?
Yes. My opinion probably, no, I will say my opinion would have differed had it been.
She doesn't have a different opinion besides what she said.
Sustained as to the form of the answer, I think you can inquire into the limitations on the opinion and hypotheticals, but go ahead.
Was the surface area in which the impression was taken from, was it a limiting factor in forming your opinion?
Yes, it was.
If this was a surface that didn't bend or become distorted in the manner that you've described earlier, could you have taken your opinion further?
Yes, I would have.
And tell us about that.
Because these are differences that can be explained, but because the surface is pliable, I have to err on the side of caution, and that is why I chose limited association.
And did you explain this further in the next slide, 8 days?
So these are just the pictures. Once again, the vent is at the scene, and then the vent as I received it and then photographed it. I've made some red dotted lines that go throughout the left side of the vent, and that's to kind of show you the different planes that I was having to deal with. So the areas that are really somewhat actually very clear in the impression itself are on that pliable different plane surface. So that's where my caution came in. So your limiting factors include a pliable and multi-plane surface, the fact that the location of the dryer vent at the scene is located at an angle on a wall, overlapping impressions within impression A. So I don't know if it's because the shoe hit multiple times or the shoe hit once and then the vent bent and the shoe moved. And then distortion within the latent print. So there's multiple kind of impressions within it. And
that overlapping impressions, what do you mean again by that, Agent Davis? Are you talking about multiple shoes on here or the multiple hits by the same shoe? Can you elaborate on that for us?
So overlapping, if I may go back a couple screens, on this right-hand side, it's basically unclear, and then I can tell that multiple times there's elements on here that overlap within itself. So there's areas that are clear, but surrounding it on the edges are overlapping impressions. So if I can tell that these elements have hit multiple times, then I call that overlapping impressions.
And what can cause that overlapping impression?
So like I've said, if you step once and then something happens with your shoe, in this case it could have been that the vent crumpled in on itself and it caused the shoe to kind of move and then step on top of its own impression, or you step on that vent one time and then you step on it again, so that would be multiple taps.
Thank you.
And then, because it's a limited association of class characteristics, other footwear with the same class characteristics observed in the impression are included in the population of sources. So, because I'm not identifying the shoe, I have to include other shoes that could have been with that same characteristics of rectangles upon rectangles, void rectangles and rectangles. Other shoes may have those.
But you're not talking about other shoes that you examined or collected, but just other shoes that were part of the production process of Nike.
Yes. Other shoes that share those limiting class characteristics. So it could be a knockoff of the Nike. It could be another shoe.
If I may approach the witness, Your Honor.
Yes.
I want to show you two items of evidence at this point. Agent Davis, and one is 219A. To be clear, can you show them, now that this item has been flattened, can you show the members of the jury which side you actually got the footwear impression off of?
So the photograph of the footwear impression is right in this area. You can see it. And it's flattened, so obviously this edge on the left-hand side and this edge on the right-hand side would have been bent down when it was on the wall. But the impression is right in here, and it is, like I said, tonally reversed, so it looks white. And then we enhanced it and made it look black.
And there's a scale sticker that's on the outside of 219A, and that's where that impression would have been.
Yes, the agent would have put that on there to take the photograph.
And I believe a while ago you mentioned that you did process the back of that vent just to be safe. Is that right?
Yes, I did put powder on the underside of it just to see if I could see any latent impressions on there.
Okay. And then State's Exhibit number 368. Can you again identify that item for us?
So this is the footwear impression that I had forensic photographer Melissa Southern enhance. This has not actually been totally reversed. I just used this because the detail was a little better. So this is the impression that was on the wall.
Okay, so to be clear, the photograph we're looking at is the impression on the wall. That's the vent.
Correct.
A photograph of the vent on the wall.
Correct.
With a scale beside it.
Yes.
Okay.
The overlay that you see is of the right shoe standard that I made myself and then made it into a clear overlay. And then I taped it on here to kind of remind me of what orientation could possibly be.
And when you do that, you could just put the overlay on top of the photograph, and what do you see?
I do see elements. The design is very similar in the fact that we do have rectangles within rectangles, the void, and then rectangles within rectangles. I do see slippage that happens, distortion within the latent itself with overlapping impressions. When I put the standard down, physical shape and size do seem similar, but there are also other elements that it starts to slip down on this side, so movement. And I do see that void in there, and then some of the wear does seem consistent. But like I said, I'm erring on the side of caution.
So that overlay comes from State's Exhibit 60B, is that correct? The right black and white shoe.
Black and red shoe, yes, sir.
Black and red shoe, excuse me. And so you make a standard from that black and red shoe, 60B, excuse me, and then you make the overlay from the standard.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to publish State's Exhibit number 368 to the members of the jury by allowing them to pass that document amongst themselves. I would also ask to publish 319A at this time. It does have some fingerprint powder on it, but I've handled it myself, and Agent Davis has handled it, and I don't see any transfer.
All right. That'll be fine. Do you have any paper towels? Just. Pass that along with it in case anybody wants to use a paper towel to hold that exhibit, and bailiff, if you'll just pass those exhibits to the jurors, please.
Yeah, we have gloves here as well if someone needs those. regarding this particular item. You've talked a lot about having to flip the pattern on the bottom of the right shoe. How do you know that it's not the left shoe making that impression if the left shoe is kind of a mirror image of the right shoe?
Are you talking specifically on the vent?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
The vent, as I said before, when I looked at the shoe and I made the standards, the way the void or the recessed area was pointing to the right is the only way that I could get it to line up was on the right shoe. And also, just from my experience and my opinion as a crime scene investigator, if I were to climb something, I would tend to want to use my right foot to balance. So based on the way that I could get things to line up and then just my experience.
It wasn't the left. You looked at the left shoe in regards to this net, and the left shoe was not the one that made that impression.
I was able to exclude the left shoe of item 76.
Thank you. All right. If we can go to your next slide.
I believe the next slide moves into the burglary case.
It does. And do you still have your statement? May I approach the witness room?
Yes.
Moving into the burglary case. Excuse me. Again, we introduced the photographs earlier, and did you use photographs, some of those photographs in regards to your processing of the burglary case?
Yes, sir, I did.
And Agent 4N provided a disc of photographs that I believe contained over 200 photographs of carpet impressions. Did you use those during the course of your analysis, comparison, and evaluation as well?
Yes, I did.
I want to show you items that have been labeled 369 through 384. If you will take a look at those items and tell me if you recognize what they are. You just look at the general nature of them and then we'll go through them specifically.
Yes, these are photos that I had our forensic photographer Melissa Southern print out for me for the comparison purposes. And that's it, State's Exhibit, 369 through 384.
Agent Davis, 369 through 384, those are photographs. Do they also contain the overlays that you have described earlier?
Yes, sir, they do.
Or at least some of those photographs contain overlays that we've described earlier.
Yes, and just remember that I'm using these to kind of aid myself when I go testify into court to kind of remember how I thought, a couple years ago and for orientation purposes.
We'll start with 369. Can you describe that item for us, ma'am?
State's Exhibit 369 is a shoe impression from the scene, I believe, and I have it in my presentation. I believe it's placard in.
And did you use this photograph and overlay during your comparison and analysis as well as in your presentation?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce 369 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, sir.
It's allowed.
State's Exhibit number 370. Do you recognize that? I'm sorry.
State's Exhibit 370, which was an enhancement. So yes, it was a footwear impression that was on the scene. A footwear impression?
Again, used during the course of your analysis and in your presentation.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce 370 into evidence, and both 369 and 370 for substantive purposes.
Any objection, Ms. D? All right, they are allowed.
371.
State's Exhibit 371 is a footwear impression that's located on carpet. It's placard A.
Again, used during your analysis and in your presentation.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce 371 for substantive purposes.
Any objection?
No, sir.
Allowed.
State's Exhibit 372, which is another footwear impression on carpet photo. It's from placard B.
Used during the course of your analysis and in your presentation.
Yes, sir.
I'd ask to introduce 372 for substantive purposes.
Any objection?
No, sir.
It's allowed.
State's Exhibit 373, a carpet impression photo, and I've also attached an overlay on top. It is of placard C.
Used during the course of your analysis and presentation?
Yes, sir.
I'd ask to introduce 373 for substantive purposes.
Any objection?
No, sir.
Allowed.
374?
State's Exhibit 374 is another footwear impression on carpet. I also have an overlay on top of it, and it is of placard D.
Was it used during the course of your analysis and presentation?
Yes, sir.
I'd ask to introduce 374 for substantive purposes. Excuse me.
Any objection?
No, sir.
Allowed.
State's Exhibit 375, which is another footwear impression on carpet. I've attached an overlay on this one. It is placard E.
Used for your analysis and presentation?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, I'd ask to introduce 375 for substantive purposes.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Allowed.
State's Exhibit 376, another footwear impression on carpet with my overlay attached. It is of placard F.
Was it used during your analysis and presentation?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, I'd ask to introduce 376 for substantive purposes.
Any objection?
No, sir.
Allowed.
377, another carpet impression with my overlay on it. It is of placard G.
Used during the course of your analysis and presentation?
Yes, sir.
I'd ask to introduce 377 for substantive purposes.
Any objection?
No, sir.
Allowed.
State's Exhibit 378, footwear impression on carpet with an overlay on it, placard H.
Used during your analysis and presentation?
Yes, sir.
I'd ask to introduce 378 for substantive purposes.
Any objection?
No, sir.
Allowed.
State's Exhibit 379, footwear impression on carpet with an overlay, placard I.
Used during your analysis and presentation?
Yes, sir.
I'd ask to introduce 379 for substantive purposes.
Any objection?
No, sir.
Allowed.
State's Exhibit 380 is a photo of a possible footwear impression. It is placard J.
Used during your analysis and presentation?
Yes, sir.
I would ask to introduce for substantive purposes.
Any objection?
No, sir.
It's allowed.
State's Exhibit 381, carpet impression with an overlay on top of it. It's placard K.
Used for your analysis and presentation?
Yes, sir.
I'd ask to introduce 381 for substantive purposes.
Any objection?
No, sir.
Allowed.
State's Exhibit 382, footwear impression on carpet with an overlay, placard L.
Used during your analysis and presentation?
Yes, sir.
I'd ask to introduce 382 for substantive purposes.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Allowed.
State's Exhibit 383, footwear impression on carpet with an overlay on top, placard M.
Used for your analysis and presentation?
Yes, sir.
I'd ask to introduce 383 for substantive purposes.
Any objection?
No.
It's allowed.
And 384.
State's Exhibit 384 is a footwear impression, appears to be on a hardwood floor, and it's placard P.
384, was it used during your analysis and presentation?
Yes, it was.
I'd ask to introduce 384 for substantive purposes.
Any objection?
No, sir.
Allowed.
CCBI case number 3158, Agent Davis, is that for the downstairs apartment or the burglary as we've been calling it?
Yes. Yes, sir, it is.
And were you asked to do some footwear comparisons in the downstairs apartment?
I was.
Can you describe kind of generally what type of comparison you did for the downstairs apartment?
This is using the same two pairs of shoes, so item 76, red and black, Nike sneakers, and then item 80, which is the blue and black sneakers. I was asked to compare those with impressions that were located on the scene. They were a range of carpet, hardwood floor, and I believe on the railing of the outside of the apartment.
The carpet. Tell us a little bit about what type of surface that is in terms of how it would affect your analysis of a case, or does it affect your analysis of a case?
Yes, it does. Carpet, especially newer carpet, tends to want to have stiff fibers. So when you step on them, it's much like stepping in mud. The fibers kind of want to go back. Sometimes when you step onto carpet, that textured surface, it's hard to line up the impression or do sizing because the fibers want to kind of shrink back. So I have to take that into account. Also with carpet, you're more than likely not going to leave an individualizing characteristic on it just because it is textured. and some of those fibers want to fill in the areas that you, like a stamp, those recessed areas that normally wouldn't touch, it wants to kind of get into those areas.
What effect would, if the floor had been recently vacuumed, would that affect the carpet and its ability to retain a footwear impression?
Just kind of in my experience, when you're vacuuming, the fibers kind of want to go up. If it was recently vacuumed, then I would think it would be a better surface than if you had an older carpet that was already flattened.
You mentioned a deck rail. What are some of the limitations that could be on a deck rail?
It could be from elements, so has it rained, sun, have multiple shoes stepped onto this rail, climbing on anything. The rail isn't going to be flat either. There's going to be multiple planes onto that rail. Also, it's a kind of a common area, so your hands may end up going onto that rail. And then, of course, if someone's going to climb onto that rail, the position, how are they going to step onto it, how much pressure they're going to use. So it's not a flat surface, and you kind of have to take all those into consideration.
And how about the surface of, say, a hardwood floor or something like that?
Hardwood floor is a little bit better. It is a flat surface. It depends on the texture of the hardwood floor, but there's not as much give in a hardwood floor as there would be carpet or railing.
If we could go to your next slide, please.
Would you mind if I step down?
Sure, please.
So on the screen, I have item 10-2. It is the railing that is as photographed on scene. It's also placard in. For the remainder of the photos that I have up on here, I've used the photographs because it tended to give a little bit more detail. I do believe the agent tried to lift the impression. When I looked at it, it just wasn't as clear detail.
And so what did you do with this item, Agent Davis?
So just right off the bat, I noticed that there are multiple impressions within this. I've labeled them impression A, B, and C. Impression A mostly pertaining with this kind of circular pattern that's right within here. I don't exactly know if that's a cup that has left the rings on there or if that's a rounded shoe. I'm not sure. Impression B, which is in this general area, has rounded, they're not quite squares because they have the rounded edges, so I'll just call them polygons. And they're right next to each other. They kind of are parallel. And then impression C also has very similar rounded polygons. And I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, and they do seem like they kind of overlap each other.
You 3 impressions in one, I guess, fairly small area here. Is that unusual, Agent Davis, or how can you explain that to us?
No, footwear impressions tend to always overlap, so it's very common to have overlapping impressions. And you really don't know what impression belongs to what impression until you take the overlay and kind of set it on top to see which fits best. So I have kind of highlighted the areas. Impression A is in blue, impression B is in yellow, and impression C is in pink. This kind of helps separate them out, if you will. So let's start with impression A. Like I talked a little bit earlier, that circular pattern, I don't find that circular pattern in item 76 or item 80, which if you recall is the blue and black sneakers and the red and black sneakers. I don't find that circular pattern, so I was able to exclude item 76 right and left shoe and item 80 right and left shoes from making impression A on item 10-2 placard in. So for impression B, which I've highlighted in the yellow, I was able to line up a bit of the section of the shoe. So my arrow, I have a red arrow for orientation. On the right, I have the right shoe, and remember it's horizontally flipped, and I did that to aid with your viewing. But I did a limited association of class characteristics of item 80, the right shoe. I was able to exclude the left shoe of item 80 and item 76 of right and left shoes. My limiting factors on this one was a pliable and multi-plane surface, overlapping impressions within A, B, and C, and other footwear with the same class characteristics observed in the impression are included in the population of possible sources.
So when you say pliable and multi-plane surface, is that similar to the vent that we saw earlier?
It is. This one has less planes. There appears to be a plane, and then another plane, and then right underneath the ruler is another plane where it kind of shifts down.
And again, kind of going through your design and physical shape and size and wear elements, what elements there, characteristics there led you to this limited association?
The right shoe of item 80 does have these rounded polygons and then you can't really tell in the photo, you can tell more in the shoe. There's a little recessed area and then another polygon that kind of sits within it, and they're sort of parallel to each other. I used the photograph and I did put the overlay on top of it to kind of remind myself, and it lines up the best in the right shoe.
And again, your limited association in this for this scenario, what were the limits on your identification here?
So the plane, the pliable nature of it, the multi-plane, the fact that there are multiple impressions within it. I don't see any individualizing characteristics, and then I don't see any wear in that, so it kind of limits what I can say.
Similar to what you talked about in regards to the vent, the surface area, again, was that a major contributing factor in being able to make any sort of identification here on this deck rail?
Yes, sir.
And so both of the red and black shoes were excluded, and then the left shoe was blue and black shoe was excluded.
Yes, sir. And then if I move to impression C, which was the pink, it is overlapping. Once again, there's the pliable multi-plane surface and there's overlapping impressions. When I took the standards of both the left and right shoe of item 80, they did both match generally match in the pattern type. However, it is overlapping and there's only one or two little rounded elements that are actually clear in here. So I did a limited association of class characteristics of item 80, both the right and left shoe, while excluding item 76, the right and left shoe.
And how are you able to say that both the right and left shoe could have made this impression?
Because when I tried to use the overlays from the left and right shoe, there were certain elements in the toe area that did want to line up, but I'm limited in the quality and quantity of the elements and the details within the impression.
And you've got orientation unknown kind of written there in red. Does that play a factor in being able to determine which shoe it was?
Yes.
And orientation, that's been on several of your slides. When you say orientation, what are you referring to when you use that term?
The directionality of which way the shoe was actually facing.
So not the impression, but which way the shoe would be going.
Correct.
And kind of going back to the vent, even in this scenario, can you tell, like, for example, with the vent, can you tell if someone's going up or down based on the impression, if they would be coming off the balcony or be going on to the balcony?
The vent was a little bit easier because there were certain elements that void that was only found in the ball and toe area, whereas in the same pattern type is located throughout the shoe. So I really couldn't tell directionality.
Okay, on the vent or on this?
On the railing.
Okay, on the railing. But in terms of how the person was moving based on what you saw in the vent, could you tell whether the person was going up or down?
No, I can't. I don't know if the vent was used to get up or the vent was used to get down.
Right, that's a better way of saying it. And the same here, you can't tell if someone was going up or down.
That's correct. And other shoes sharing those class characteristics, so the rounded polygon elements of it could be as a population of the possible sources.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm going to hand you, well, first of all, in looking at State's Exhibit number 57A and B, are those the shoes that you use to make the standards in State's Exhibits number 361 and 362?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then I want to turn your attention to State's Exhibit 276, which has already been introduced in evidence, and I'll ask that you can take a look at that item and tell, well, and I think that's actually 276A, and tell me what that is.
State's Exhibit 276A is the gel lift that was taken by Agent Ferran of the railing outside the apartment.
And does that 276A, does that have an overlap, or excuse me, an overlay on it?
Yes, it does.
And again, tell us how that overlay works.
States Exhibit 276B,
Oh, it's 276B, excuse me.
that's marked the overlay. I added that, so I've taken the standard, I've made an overlay of it, and to help remind me, I've taped it on here.
And when you put that overlay on the jail, does it appear kind of in, as you've shown here in the PowerPoint, that those circles correspond to the circles on the deck rail?
They do share similarities, yes.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to publish 276, well, 276A and B,
Yes, and
passing it to the members of the jury.
that's fine. If you'll hand it to the bailiff, please.
And I do want to kind of remind you that the gel lift, when they take the gel lift and put it down and then lift it up, you're not seeing through it, you're seeing at it, so it's going to be kind of opposite of what you see on the screen.
The blue and black shoes, those are the shoes that identified at least by the bag as the shoes belong to the Ronald Anthony. Is that right now?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, if I may publish State's Exhibit number 282. It's the scale diagram of the bottom apartment using the tripod, and I'll just put it behind Agent Davis.
Yes.
You mentioned in your testimony, Agent Davis, that you identified some of these photographs by using placards. And what do you mean by placards?
Those are the yellow tent-like plastic frames that an agent will set down to identify.
Okay. And you and Agent 4N and Agent Gold have testified that once a placard is assigned to an item of evidence, they're at the scene that that placard will remain and that label will remain with that item throughout the history of the case. Is that your understanding?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So when you say that this area was placard in, do you see placard in here on the scale drawing of the bottom apartment?
I believe it is on the bottom near the patio on the left-hand side.
Okay. And then the rest of the photographs that you've identified, you said they've had letters A, B, C, D, E, F, and G on the photographs. Are those letters represented here on the scale diagram as well?
It appears to be so, yes.
And it appears that I may have this upside down. Would you agree with me on that?
Possibly.
Okay. All right, let's do it that way. Does that look like N now?
Yes, sir.
And then the letters appear to be the correct way now. All right. In going through these photographs, if you can just kind of, as we go through, identify which area you're talking about in terms of where the placard is on the diagram as well. Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Let's go to the next slide. And you can stand down if you need to, and maybe I'll move the scale diagram down for you as well.
It might be.
You work with that, Agent Davis?
I can.
Okay.
So item 19-1-1, it's the photograph on scene on a floor, and it is placard Q, sorry, would be towards the bottom. And I'm not for sure the layout of the apartment, but I presume that this is probably the living room area.
And to be fair, you've never been to this apartment. It's not part of your job to go to the actual crime scene and process the crime scene in any way.
No, sir.
All right, but you do rely on these letters to proceed in your analysis or investigation, I should say.
It does help, yes, sir.
All right.
So placard Q, and I used the photo that was on scene, and I had Melissa Southern, our forensic photographer, enhance it a little bit to darken it up. And I do see one footwear impression. I determined that it's just to be impression A for clarity. I do see some parallel bars here, and then this oblong sort of pattern, and then I would presume it to be a heel pattern, and a very small heel. So we did not have an oblong pattern or parallel bars, so I was able to exclude item number 76, right and left shoes, and item 80, right and left shoes.
So this surface area a little more conducive to getting a footwear impression, would that be fair to say?
I would say so, yes.
Okay. But in this case, neither the black and red shoes or the black and blue shoes matched in any way to this impression.
That's correct.
And is it your understanding, and that, to your knowledge, where there are several people there in the house, both employees of the apartment?
If she has any firsthand knowledge, I haven't heard any firsthand knowledge that she had about who isn't there. She's testified that this doesn't match any of the impressions she was asked to make. It's just hearsay.
Sustained.
Do you know if there were other people in that apartment?
Yes.
Okay. Who were those people?
I know that there was the,
Objection, it's hearsay.
Overruled as an expert, she's entitled to testify on, as to matters that she relied upon in forming her opinion if it was provided pursuant to that opinion. So I'm going to allow the testimony.
based on the agent's reports, I was able to know that there was a victim, and the victim also had a daughter that lived in the residence above. I do not know, when it comes to the burglary of the lower apartment, if there was anybody that was in the house.
Okay, thank you, Agent James. If you can go to your next slide.
The
And
next-
what I'm gonna do here, it's in reviewing your report, there are approximately 13 carpet impressions, is that right?
I'd have to count them, but I know it's in the teens.
Okay. Several carpet impressions and identifications made, or limited associations made during the course of those carpet impressions. What I'm going to ask that you do in going through your slides is if you can just go through them and note for the members of the jury the areas in which caused you to make the limited association, and then any of the factors or circumstances that caused you to limit that association, if that makes sense. So when you start with this slide, I may ask you a few questions, but I'm just going to ask that you go through it in that way.
Yes, sir.
Does that make sense? All right. Thank you, Agent Davis.
So item 44-1 is as photographed on scene, and it was labeled as placard A. Placard A, according to the sketch, appears to be a side room. I believe it to be the office, but without, seeing the actual pictures, I can't say for sure, but this would be A. I did a limited association of class characteristics of item 80, right and left shoe, that's the blue and black sneakers, an exclusion of item 76, the right and left. My limiting factors were, once again, this is a pliable surface, it's carpet, so remember I said that those fibers kind of want to always go back, and that can limit to, if I can get the sizing, it's just going to skew things. The photography plane was not parallel and perpendicular, meaning the camera, when the camera should be on top of the impression, it did not appear to be parallel to the impression itself, and the camera lens did not appear to be perpendicular. This is important because even just the smallest little angle that your camera lens is at can throw off sizing. It can make the shoe appear to be larger or smaller. It can make elements, remember I said physical shape and size, those elements appear to be longer or shorter. So, and I could tell this because the scale that was in the picture, when I put a scale on top of the picture when it was printed out, Melissa Southern does the photos 1-to-1 when she prints them out. When I put the scale on it, it did not match up. The numbers wanted to skew off a little bit. So other footwear with the same class characteristics observed in the impression are included in the population of possible sources. I was unable to determine orientation because some of these physical shape and size of the elements did match up with this shoe or when I turned it the opposite direction. So I was unable to determine which one.
What characteristics specifically caused you to make the limited association in this case?
The fact that some of the elements did line up, the rounded polygons, if you will, did want to line up, but like I said, again, you've got carpet, and the carpet wants to kind of fill in those voids.
And for the purposes of clarification, when you, on your slide, if you have the two shoes on the right side of the slide are the shoes that you made the limited association with.
Yes, sir.
So going forward, if there's one shoe on the right side of the slide, that's the one you made the association with.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
The next one is item 45-1 as photographed on scene. It would be placard B. Placard B appears to be in that living room area, slightly above placard Q. Once again, the orientation wasn't able to be determined, so there was a limited association of class characteristics of item 80, the right and left shoe. Those are the blue and black sneakers. Exclusion of item 76, right and left. The same limiting factors, I've got a pliable surface, and the photography plane was not parallel and perpendicular, so that limited my association.
Other footwear with the same class characteristics observed in the impression are included in the population of possible sources. Next one was item 46-1. It is placard C. Placard C appears to be right next to placard B on the right. I was able to determine orientation. Orientation is determined, I used the arch elements, or the arch area elements, these polygon little figures, and was able to make, it worked better in that area when I did use my overlay on top. So there was a limited association of class characteristics of item 80, the left shoe, and I excluded item 80 right shoe and item 76 right and left shoes. These same limiting factors, it's carpet, it's pliable, and the photography plane was not parallel perpendicular. Other footwear with the same class characteristics observed in the impression are included in the population of possible sources. And bear with me, these are kind of probably all going to look the same, but I did do an analysis for each one. Item 47-1, which was placard D. Placard D is slightly above C, I believe in the living room area. I determined the orientation to be up, so it would be limited association of class characteristics of item 80, the left shoe. I excluded item 80 right shoe and item 76 right and left shoes. Once again, the limiting factors are pliable surface and the photography plane was not parallel and perpendicular. Other footwear with the same class characteristics observed in the impression are included in the population of possible sources. Next, item 48-1, and it's placard E. Placard E is above placard D, living room, I believe. There was a limited association of class characteristics of item 76, the right shoe. I excluded item 76 left shoe and item 80 right and left shoes. The reason that I was able to do a limited association was this area right in here towards the heel. I used the outline to kind of determine if it was a left or right shoe. And then I used this area that kind of corresponds with this area as well. However, like I said, it's carpet, fibers kind of want to shift back in, so that was one of my limiting factors. Pliable surface and photography plane not being parallel and perpendicular. Other footwear with the same class characteristics observed in the impression are included in the population of possible sources.
And Agent Davis, this is the first time that you've made a limited association in the bottom apartment with item 76, the red and black shoes. Is that right, ma'am?
Yes, sir.
Up until now, they've all been the blue and black ones.
Yes, sir. The blue and black were easy to exclude because there was none of those parallel kind of rounded polygons observed in there. 49-1, which is placard F, which is next to placard E in the living room. Limited association of class characteristics of item 76 right shoe. Exclusion of item 76 left shoe and item 8 right shoe. Once again, limiting factors, pliable surface, photography plane is not parallel perpendicular. Other footwear with the same class characteristics observed in the impression are included in the population of possible sources. Next was placard G, item 50. Placard G is above placard F in the scale in the drawing. Limited association of class characteristics of item 76, left shoe. Excluded item 76 right shoe and item 80 right and left shoes. Limiting factors, pliable surface, photography plane not parallel and perpendicular, and of course other shoes sharing those class characteristics are included in the source. Item 51-1, which was placard H, which is right next to placard G in the drawing. This one is a limited association of class characteristics of item 80 left shoe, so the black and blue sneaker. Exclusion of item 80 right shoe and item 76 right and left shoes. Same limiting factors, pliable surface, photography plane, and other footwear with the same class characteristics observed in the impression are included in the population of sources. Placard I, which is item 52-1, which is above placard G in the drawing, so living room. Limited association of class characteristics of item 80, the left shoe. exclusion of item 80 right shoe and item 76 right and left shoes. Limiting factors are pliable surface and the photography plane not being parallel and perpendicular. Other footwear with the same class characteristics observed in the impression are included in the population of sources. Placard J, which is another footwear and carpet, limited association of class characteristics of both right and left shoes of item 80. I was unable to determine possible orientation. I excluded item 76 right and left shoes. Same limiting factors, pliable surface, photography plane not being parallel and perpendicular, and other footwear with the same class characteristics observed in the impression are included in the population of possible sources. And I apologize if I seem like I might be repeating myself. Item 54, which is placard K. Placard K appears to be, I'm not sure if this is an offset of a bedroom or another office, but it's off of the living room. Limited association of class characteristics of item 80 right shoe, exclusion of item 80 left shoe, and item 76 right and left shoes. Limiting factors, pliable surface, photography plane not being parallel and perpendicular, and then other footwear with the same class characteristics observed in the impression are included in the population of possible sources. A few more. Item 55-1, placard L. Placard L is next to placard K, so that offset of the room. Limited association of class characteristics of item 80 left shoe. I excluded item 80 right shoe and item 76 right and left shoes. Same limiting factors of pliable surface and photography plane not being parallel and perpendicular. Other footwear with the same class characteristics observed in the impression are included in the population of possible sources. 56-1 at placard M. I believe placard M is also in that same room. Limited association of class characteristics of item 80, the left shoe. Exclusion of item 80 right shoe and item 76 right and left shoes. Same limiting factors, pliable surface, photography plane not being parallel and perpendicular, and other footwear with the same class characteristics are included in the population of possible sources. Placard P, item 57. I believe placard P is, I'm not for sure what this area is. It appears to be a wooden floor. It could be towards the front of the apartment, I surmise, because the patio is in the back. But it is on a wooden floor. I excluded item 76, right and left shoes, and item 80, right and left shoes, based on the appearance of several elements and patterns within it. I also have a cross type pattern in here with several large polygons, and when I placed the overlays on top, none of them matched up, so I did exclude that. And I did not determine orientation because I do not know what this shoe impression was. It was previously searched in our database in Sidecar, which I had previously said was the search image capture and retrieval, and we were unable to determine brand.
Is that Sidecar, is that it's essentially a database of different shoe patterns?
Yes. It helps to determine brand. It helps to let investigators know, hey, I'm possibly looking for a Reebok pair of shoes, so don't collect all these other shoes, just look for Reeboks. It helps determine brand. Okay, so I realized that that was a lot of information to kind of throw at you at one time, so I did a summary for you. Item 80, right and left shoes. So these are the photos or impressions that had limited association to both the right and left shoes. I was unable to determine orientation. That's item 10-1, impression C, the pink impression, that was in placard N. Item 44-1, placard A. Item 45-1, placard B. And item 53, placard J.
And Agent Davis, it seemed to me from going over the presentation that when you were unable to determine the orientation, was that a significant factor in not being able to exclude a right or left shoe?
I'm sorry, repeat that?
The orientation in which the impression was on the carpet, was that a significant factor in not being able to exclude the right or the left shoe?
I would not say, well, yes, I would agree with that. Sorry.
Sorry.
Item 80, limited association to just the left shoe. There's several. Item 46-1, placard C. Item 47-1 placard D. Item 51-1 placard H. Item 52-1 placard I. Item 55-1 placard L. And item 56-1 placard M. Limited association to item 80 right shoe was item 10-1 impression B, placard N, which I highlighted in the yellow, and then item 54 placard K. Oop, I think it did something. Okay, it did. Maybe. Okay, I need it to go up.
There you go.
Item 76, right shoe, limited association of class characteristics, would be item 48-1, placard E, and item 49-1, placard F. Item 76, left shoe, limited association of class characteristics to item 50, placard G. And finally, the exclusions. Item 10-2, impression A, placard N on the balcony railing. Item 19-1-1, which was placard Q. And then item 57, placard P. Those were all exclusions to all shoes.
Thank you. You may return to the witness stand if I may approach.
Yes.
In State's Exhibits 269 through 284, some of these photographs have overlays and others don't. Why is that, Agent Davis?
If I was able to determine that there was anything that was close for pattern type, so design, physical shape, and size, I used the overlays to kind of find the area that I wanted. And then when I was able to determine that it could match, or I'm sorry, have a limited association with the left or right shoe, I placed the overlay on there, once again, just to remind me and to kind of help with orientation.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to publish State's Exhibits number 369 through 384.
All right, we're going to take a mid-afternoon recess before we do that, and we'll, upon return, we'll allow publication of that. Members of the jury, if you'll gather in the deliberation room at 10 minutes past 4, please recall all the instructions, leave your notepads in your chairs. Everyone else, please remain seated. All right, outside the presence of the jury, I'll just note for the record that at some point, one of the jurors handed the bailiff a note that said the wall projector is putting a pattern near the defense table, and so apparently the projector in the ceiling was still on and putting a little, just the BGA symbol on the wall over there, and I turned the projector off. But that was, some of you may notice that a note was handed up to the bailiff. That's what that was about. Anything else we need to take up?
No, sir.
We'll be in recess 15 minutes.